Hello, good morning, good afternoon, welcome. I'm very pleased to be joined by Patrick Ten Brink. Patrick is the Secretary General of the European Environment Bureau, which is the leading or largest association of non-government associations across Europe in over 40 countries with I think about 180 different individual organizations involved in your group. So welcome, Patrick. Thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me.
Yeah, you're going to be speaking at the Powergrid Leaders event, which is in March on the 11th to 13th in the Netherlands in 2025. I thought it'd be great to have a chat to get your views on the grid. There's a lot of focus now on the grid and trying to expand the grid, both the capacity and the technology, and we're seeing a huge shift, I guess, from a sort of 20% electricity market to potentially sort of 60%, 80% electricity market with the electrification of a lot of processes from heat pumps to mobility. So a lot of focus on how we develop the sustainable electricity grids and obviously a lot of impacts in that change. So what are some of your sort of initial thoughts around the clean electricity grid of the future that we're building, and what do we have to do now and what do we have to get right in order to facilitate that sort of key critical infrastructure?
Yeah, no, thanks for the question. I mean, I think it may be a little bit surprising that a sort of environmental civil society organization talks about the need for investment in the grid, but I mean, we have worked for a number of years now on basically the decarbonization of the future, how to step away from fossil fuels towards a sustainable electricity and energy supply system. And it's clear that from all the conclusions and talks we've had also with the universities and others, is that we need to move towards greater electrification because you can then move to decarbonization through that. And of course, the greater the electrification, the greater the need for a grid, whether it's transition grid or the distribution network. So we see very much a future where we need to strengthen the grid. We've done an analysis also together with CAN Europe, looking that it is actually possible to have 100% renewables grid by 2040, but that of course requires there to be savings in through energy efficiency, through circular economy, through sufficiency in a number of measures and renewable energies and heat pumps. It is possible to do that, but to do that you also need to be able to share electricity across borders. To be able to make sure that wind in one area reaches another area and solar reaches another area. So I think there we're definitely excited by the need. There is a multi-billion investment required to make sure the grid works. It needs to be a smart grid. It also needs to be able to connect to households at one level. If it's a person putting a PV panel on their balcony towards covering their roofs, but to wider communities, to, of course, much larger renewable energy projects. That has to all be possible. But it also needs to be possible that people, if they've made the investment in an electric car, that they can plug in their car, not only to charge it, but to sell the electricity. And then more and more people can become part of that transition.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you mentioned, I guess, intelligence or smart grids, and I guess by enabling those technologies, we get a much more sort of optimal system. We don't get so much latency on necessary build, and we're able to put the electrons to work more effectively. I guess a key area, or I won't say the word battleground, but be around permitting. We've already seen challenges in the energy transition to date around permitting. Bottlenecks, I guess. What are some of your thoughts around permitting?
Well, I think permitting, the speed of permitting is an issue. I mean, we need to advance quickly with the sort of the decarbonization transition. But it's worthwhile saying, well, what's the problem behind the permitting and what's the reason for it? And I don't know how many of you remember the financial crisis in 2008, but there was a move towards austerity and severe budget cuts across lots of parts of Europe and lots of activities. And one group that suffered was the ability for local authorities to engage in permitting and public participation and consultation and inspections and the data analysis. So they don't have the capacity to do the permits as fast as they would like. So if you look at some of the recommendations put out there recently in permitting, they say, let's get rid of permitting. At one level, for certain size things, I think that's fair enough. If you look at us, the ability for a household to be able to add solar power, solar cells to their house, maybe you don't need to go through an extensive permitting process. And there you could save time. That would help the households. It helps the solar industry and it helps reduce emissions. But when it comes to bigger permitting issues, whether it's a mine or an extension of a grid, then I think it is important to keep with the permitting, but to find a way of accelerating it. So this requires, therefore, an investment in the authority's capacity to be able to analyze where's the good place to do and where's the danger. So it's a data question. It also requires a sort of consultation side. So it's a people person, the experts, so they should invest in the people to do so. And then if you do that, you can actually manage to accelerate the permitting process by due investment in the capacity to do the permits and the assessment behind it. Now, this is important not just for the accelerated permitting, but if you look at the opposite, if you were to get rid of the permit and say, oh, well, this is in our national interests to build a grid here,
Yeah.
of course, people will then step up and say, no, we don't want it. That's just natural. It's human nature, and I think it's fair. It's fair to protest things that you see as wrong. Okay, if there's been no consultation, it's also going to be exacerbated. But in this sort of case, what you need to do is to if you were to allow that to happen, then you find that people then get irritated that there's a public opposition to what they see as important. And we've seen across Europe in the last 6 months to a year a cracking down on the right to protest in a lot of countries. And if you have opposition because people haven't been asked and engaged in the decision, you'll have more protests, and the more protests you have, the more temptation will be for governments to then crack down on the right to protest, which then actually leads to a reduction in basically the health of democracy, because it is part of democracy to be able to say, we don't like that, we protest. So that's also another reason to really invest in the ability to do permitting on time and to consult the local neighborhood, because if you have people engaged, you can find a solution that works. And I think that's the key of the whole thing around permitting. And then it's a win-win. You got the permits, you got the assessment, you got the people on board, and you can progress.
Yeah, it's a point well made. There's nothing wrong with the process. It's just we've underinvested in it, and invest in the process and make the process fit for purpose, and make sure that people's voices are heard, and there is time in those consultations, and bring people on board, and communicate with them, and look at meeting those objections head on, as it were, and try and communicate the benefits, and I guess also potentially look at having people understand what those benefits are, in terms of obviously their own electricity bills, or indeed participation in local projects, if that's an opportunity. Yeah, in terms of I guess some of the other issues, the grid and technology. I mean, certainly there is huge opportunity to develop the grid. There's some of the areas there in terms of sort of regulatory design or market design that concern you, or you see some opportunities there again around I guess sort of business models, and accelerating energy communities, and I guess the democratization, sorry, of energy. What are some of your thoughts there?
Well, my thoughts is, I mean, I see the sort of the electrification and the investment grid as an opportunity. I mean, where you invest depends on what sort of supply of energy you're going to get. So you do need to invest differently if you're going to support sort of household energy. So this is your solar cell on your balcony or on your roof, or whether it's a community issue, whether it's hospitals with solar cells. All of those things are one size. If you then go for the much larger areas, it's different. But if you go for a whopping great new nuclear power plant, that okay, it'll come online only 15 years into the future or whatever. But
If you're lucky, 15.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
you're lucky,
If you're
15.
lucky, yeah. I mean, those always take longer, but then that requires a different nature of the investment because it's about where do you strengthen the grid. So I think it's first of all important for people to think, well, what sort of energy do we want to get, and how do we enable it, and from whom? And clearly, a big part of the solution for the transition has to be to enable citizens to be part of it and communities to be part of it. So we need to enable this. Now, just one example, I just spoke to a friend of mine in Southeast Germany. I won't say which state it is to avoid embarrassing anyone, but he's pulled his money together to be able to buy an electric car, and he'd like to be able to sell the electricity to the grid. But this is not yet legally possible. They haven't facilitated that. You can buy electricity, but can't sell it. Now, if you want more and more people to be able to move away from fossil fuel vehicles towards electric vehicles, you need to make sure that the math stacks up for them. So to do that, it obviously, if they can sell the electricity from their car at moments of peak, then it cuts off the peak, so it saves money for the whole of the network. It also gives them an income, and they can then still charge it at moments of lower use or through their solar cells. So that then makes a massive difference on the finances of a household. So if you were to enable that, and this is just one example of Southeast Germany, but there's other barriers in other parts of Europe. So if you address one after the other, then you actually get more people engaged, more actual supply. And the guy I spoke to said, listen, at the moment, I've only got half my roof covered in solar cells because it doesn't make any sense. But if I was to be able to have my car attached and to be able to export smartly, then I'd actually invest in the second half of my roof to be covered in
Yeah.
solar cells. And then the more that you then move towards that, the more renewables you have, which is basically much less expensive than any other energy source, it should lead to a downward pressure on price. And that gets to the other half of your question, is to enable the price, not just to become a profit for the electricity producer or for the household, but also for everyone to benefit and the prices to go down. Then you also need to look at the market pricing mechanism to enable that. And that is the additional element to look at to make sure that everyone can win throughout this, because European electricity prices are higher than the prices in some other countries. And then you have a win-win-win for the household, for the electricity sector, but also for the businesses using the electricity. And that's really what we have to go for.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, we have the technology. I guess that the devil is going to be in the detail of the market design, the technology for people to, use their neighbor's energy, as it were, and for people to have, obviously, as you said, the car connected and have a battery system, be able to optimize the system and keep that energy at the edge, as it were, in terms of the grid edge. It will also, alleviate a congestion and create a more optimal system. So clearly there's huge opportunity, and having your members represented and essentially representing the people, I think is going to be critical in terms of enabling the energy transition, and certainly along the time frames that we've got, which are certainly steep in terms of the next 2 decades. So it's going to be fascinating area, and fascinating to have your participation in the event, which is coming in March. But thanks a lot, Patrick, for sharing your thoughts today. And we look forward to meeting you face to face come the Powergrid Leaders event in March.
Okay, and I'm looking forward to meeting all of them also to really see how we can talk about all the difficulties and the challenges and how we can make it work together.
Yeah, excellent. Well, many thanks, Patrick.
Thanks.
Take care. Thanks for your
Yeah,
time.
you too.